Hello and welcome to Reinfused. Today we are taking a look at, this, which is the, Sinclair ZX Spectrum Plus 3, or really rather the Amstrad Spectrum Plus 3. So yeah, this was the third machine based on the Sinclair design after Amstrad purchased the company and its IP, following obviously the Plus 2 and the Plus 2A. And this was the first one that kind of had a built-in floppy drive, albeit only the 3-inch version. So this was based on the 6128 Amstrad, whereas the previous versions were based on the 464, which has the built-in tape player, obviously. This was also the first Spectrum that was capable of capable of using the CP/M operating system out of the box with no extra hardware, because the floppy drive and some changes to how the memory was mapped allowed it to run. Those same changes also mean that this is the least compatible Sinclair Spectrum that you can buy, because several games relied on certain tricks and bugs in the Spectrum's ROMs that no longer exist after this came about. Especially things with the memory mappers and what have you. So yeah, this is probably the least loved of the Sinclair Spectrum line. Certainly the worst selling in terms of the machines that kind of had the chance. The 128K Toast-Rack doesn't really count. It wasn't really delivered in huge numbers. But yeah, this was far to the end of the Spectrum's lifetime, really. The 16-bit machines were coming out, and this was woefully underpowered. Amstrad had not put really any money into advancing the Spectrum. They were kind of just putting it on a lifeline and keeping it going in favour of their own CPC range, which, as a Spectrum owner, is annoying. As someone now who can kind of look at the whole of the market at that time, it's slightly more understandable. The CPC was, frankly, just a better machine. It had better hardware and more capabilities, although, again, a lot of people don't see that. If you only see the games that were made in the UK, most of those were just cheap ports from the Spectrum, same as the MSX really, and you don't really get to see how good the CPC, the Amstrad, could be. Look at some of the French games where it was really it was the frontline computer in France, and some of those games are just astonishing. You could look at them and you wouldn't realise they were on an 8-bit machine. So yeah, it's a shame really that the Spectrum went out with very much a whimper rather than a bang. When we said went out, this wasn't the last of the machines. It was followed up by the Plus 3B and the Plus 2B, but those were really just cut price versions of the Plus 3 and the Plus 2. So let's take a look at some of the media. So yeah, so the Plus 3 used a 3-inch disc, the same as Amstrad's other 8-bit machine, the CPC 6128, and this is kind of what they look like. So obviously the popular machine in the computing world at that point was the 3-inch disc, which where you can kind of see you see the difference. So obviously this was done for cost reasons. I know that Alan Sugar got a good deal on the 3-inch mechanisms, and they weren't selling well, so there was that, and obviously space reasons, because that is a fairly hefty chunk of extra space required to get a 3-inch drive slot in there, which if we look at that's fitting very much that whole portion. You wouldn't really fit a 3-inch disc in there, a 3.5-inch, sorry. The 3-inch discs they're a weird format, but they're also the basis for, because it was used by some companies in Japan as well, and they're the basis for the Famicom disk system, although different, slightly changed, but they're basically the same history path. Yeah, this is Disk Hacker 2, which is an interesting disc all in its own, but you can kind of see the similarities in the format, and obviously they're both double-sided formats as well. Right, so yeah, the Plus 3 was launched in 1987 and originally retailed for £249, but it wasn't long before it dropped to £199, and it was dropped in 1990. I mean, I imagine there were several factors. Amstrad claim it was because they were relaunching their CPC range and they didn't want there to be a disc competitor to those. But there's also the fact that only 15% of Spectrum sold in that time period, and bearing in mind there wasn't that many Spectrums being sold in that period, only 15% were the Plus 3. So people were buying the tape models more than they were buying the disc model. So I would imagine that also had quite a lot to do with it being dropped eventually. Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of good in the Amstrad models. Personally, I think more bad than good, but there was some good. The keyboard is pretty nice compared. Well, you know, no contest compared to the Sinclair models. They did add a lot of expansion on. Not compatible, but you could do more with it. Obviously, having on the Plus 3, you can get the second disc in there. The printer port, the expansion I/O was not really compatible with the previous Spectrum. They moved a few pins around. The MIDI port, the weird Paratel style, not Paratel, telephonic connector. Same with the auxiliary, mostly used for a keypad, I believe, the numeric keypad. RGB Paratel socket, which is a nice add-on. Obviously, that was also on the Toaster X Spectrum, though. And the good old standard RF and the external tape sound port. On the side, we have, and this is, I think, the best addition that Amstrad had, was the 2 joystick ports, the Sinclair type, obviously, and a reset button. Both of those things were exceptional additions to the Spectrum, and it's a real shame that you have to highlight those as being boons when those are things that really should have been included to begin with. But you know, Sinclair did not really believe in games, and the cut price nature of the original Spectrum meant that even a reset button was unlikely. It did get it in the Plus model though, so there is that. Still no on-off button though, and then hey. But then of course this doesn't have an on-off button either. So, you know, there you go. Right, well, I guess we'll take a little look at a game. We'll try to get one loaded. I've got two discs. One will presumably load something. If not, I guess we're just going to a flash solution, which doesn't really show off the disk drive much. Hey, let's give it a shot anyway. This is a wonderful. You know what that is? Considering the limitations of the Spectrum, some of the loading screens were quite nice. This one's okay, although no, he did have thick eyebrows, didn't he? I'm trying to. It's been a long time since I saw any Thunderbirds episodes, but I think he did have a really thick eyebrows. So you know what? Fair enough. Okay, so again, it's the same key. So let's. Yeah, we did right. Oh. Okay, let's try loading up something else. It's quite interesting that it's loading from disk, but it still has the loading bars that we recognise from tape, although all multicoloured rather than just being a couple of colours. Okay, so this is the action pack, the Boots action pack. If you don't know Boots, it's a well, I call them a chemist in the UK, but they sell a lot of stuff. They used to be also one of the main places where we bought games from, that and WH Smith's, which is kind of weird. There weren't really any specialist game shops back then. I am very old. So, yeah, some classic games here. Not necessarily great games, but certainly classic ones. So let's load up Top Gun, which if I remember rightly is a rip-off of Afterburner. Not a particularly good one. I want keyboard. Yes, I wish to define the keys. So, bank right, that was weird order. Climb. Not letting me use A, that's good. And there we go. It's very atmospheric. Oh, you know what? This is closer to being a really early flight sim than anything else. Oh, look at that. Kind of 3D, and I've crashed. Okay, well, on that appalling performance, that was the Sinclair Spectrum Plus 3. I would probably say the least loved of the Spectrums out there. Well, that's ignoring the Timex clones, but that's a whole other subject. So yeah, it's it is what it is. Amstrad were just trying to shift boxes at the end of the day. They knew the Spectrum was popular. They weren't really interested in working on it because they had their own CPC line. And so they just put in bits that they could put in cheaply, and creating all-in-one units like the Plus 2 and the Plus 3 were the easiest ways of doing that. So effectively you just had the Spectrum and the CPC lines, and they were just at the same level, so you had the two different levels tape from disc, and so it was easier for, I would assume easier for Amstrad to sell them like that, because with just 2 SKUs each they could keep track of everything well. But yeah, they made some mistakes with the Plus 3, dropping the compatibility just to gain CP/M compatibility was a bit short-sighted. It was almost a Sir Clive Sinclair mistake, because CP/M really was only really popular with business users, and the Spectrum really hadn't worked as a business machine, even though Sinclair desperately wanted it to. So yeah, an odd one really. But there you go. I still love it. I still love owning one. But I love the Spectrum because it really gave me my start in my career, and was the first computer my family could afford. I mean, second hand, but still. So yeah, anyway. Thanks for watching. If you like the video, please like. If you really like the video, please hit subscribe. If you didn't like the video or you have something else to say, then please leave it in the comments below. We've also started streaming on Twitch. So if you go to Twitch and find the Reinfused channel there, it would be great if you could follow us. Right, see you next time.